All right, today we're diving into something truly revolutionary. We're talking about the safety playbook for a whole new class of treatments called Advanced Therapy Medicinal Products, or ATMPs. Now, these are not your everyday pills. We're talking about medicines built from genes, tissues, and cells, and you better believe they need a completely different level of safety oversight.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start by figuring out what makes these therapies such a new frontier. Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how every single potential risk is mapped out. After that, we'll look at the incredible vigilance that happens after approval, including follow-ups that can last for decades. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together in practice to build a safer future for medicine. Let's get into it.
So what's the big deal? Why can't we just use the old rulebook for these new medicines? Well, it's because their complexity and just how new they are brings a whole host of risks we've never had to deal with systematically before. This is why they need their own dedicated guidelines for what's called Good Pharmacovigilance Practice, or GVP. You can just think of pharmacovigilance as the science of keeping medicine safe, the whole process of spotting, tracking, and understanding any side effects.
So what are we talking about here? At their heart, AMTs are medicines that go right to the source. They aim to fix, restore, or change how our bodies work on a fundamental biological level. Things like gene therapies that can repair faulty DNA, or cell therapies that basically retrain our own immune systems to hunt down and destroy cancer. It's a huge, huge leap beyond traditional drugs.
And this is where the real challenge kicks in. With a normal drug, we pretty much know the risks. But with ATMPs, we're sailing in uncharted waters. These therapies can stick around in the body for years, sometimes for a person's entire life. So the safety questions go way, way beyond the short term. It demands a completely new way of thinking.
So how on earth do regulators get a handle on all these new, unforeseen risks? Well, it all starts with a critical document called the Risk Management Plan, or RMP. And listen, this is not just some simple checklist of side effects. It's a deep, scientific blueprint that tries to account for every single conceivable risk.
This blueprint maps the entire life of the therapy. It starts right in the lab, asking about the purity and quality of the cells. It then follows the therapy into the patient, watches for effects for years and years, and even considers the safety of doctors, nurses, and family members. Seriously, no stone is left unturned.
And when we zoom in on just the patient-related risks, you really start to see the incredible level of detail here. We are not just talking about a rash or a headache. Oh no. We're thinking about huge biological events, like the body launching a massive immune attack against the therapy itself, or the tiny possibility of unintended genetic changes, or even what happens when these new therapeutic cells travel and set up shop in the body.
Now here's the really clever part. Just listing risks isn't enough. The key is how they get sorted inside that risk management plan. They're classified as either an important identified risk, like cytokine release syndrome in CAR-T therapy, which is a known and serious issue, or a potential risk, something that's scientifically possible and needs to be watched closely, or finally, missing information. Basically, the things we don't know yet, which have to be figured out with future studies. This classification is what drives everything that happens next.
Okay, so the therapy is approved. Job done, right? Not even close. In fact, for ATMPs, this is where some of the most important safety work really begins. This is the part where the ever-watchful eye of surveillance kicks in.
A huge part of this is absolute traceability. Think about it. These are often personalized or made in tiny batches. So if a bad reaction pops up, you have to be able to trace it back to the exact batch number and fast. This lets regulators spot a potential problem with a specific manufacturing run before it can affect anyone else. It's non-negotiable.
And the regular safety reports that companies have to file, they're called Periodic Safety Update Reports, or PSARs. They're basically supercharged for ATMPs. They have to include all sorts of special info you wouldn't see for other drugs, like data on the long-term follow-up of the original trial patients, and even any risk that the therapy could be passed on to other people.
And the company making the therapy? They have a huge ongoing responsibility. They are legally required to scan all the data they can find, from every source imaginable, looking for any new safety signals. And they have to do this at least once a month. It's a constant, proactive hunt for any sign of trouble. All this monitoring leads us to what is maybe the most demanding part of ATMP safety: the long-term studies. You see, some of the biggest questions about these therapies can only be answered over a very, very long time.
15. Let that sink in for a second. That's not 15 days or months. That's 15 years. For some gene therapies, especially the ones that permanently change a patient's DNA, regulators demand a follow-up commitment for that long. It's a pretty incredible time frame, and it's designed specifically to catch any problem that might take a decade or more to show up.
And this timeline just shows you this is a marathon, not a sprint. The study has specific goals and checkpoints along the entire 15-year journey. It's all about making sure the therapy keeps working and that its benefits continue to outweigh any potential long-term risks that might emerge.
So these long-term studies are really doing double duty. On the one hand, they're checking for efficacy. Does the treatment actually last? Do the new cells or genes stick around? But on the other hand, they are on high alert, constantly monitoring for those specific long-term safety worries, like the risk of the therapy accidentally causing a new cancer down the line.
Okay, so we've mapped out all the risks, and we're watching patients for literally decades. But is that enough? How do we go from just watching for problems to actively preventing them? This is where a whole proactive toolkit comes into play.
And that brings us to the really important question. How do we actually give doctors, pharmacists, and patients the practical tools and the knowledge they need to use these incredibly powerful and complex therapies as safely as humanly possible?
The answer is something called Additional Risk Minimization Measures, or ARMS for short. These are tangible, real-world tools. We're talking about things like only allowing the therapy to be used in specially accredited hospitals, giving doctors detailed surgical checklists, training pharmacists on how to handle these delicate products, and even giving patients special alert cards with critical safety info.
And this is where you can see how it all works in practice. These tools are tailored for specific risks. For a CAR T therapy, the biggest, most immediate danger is something called cytokine release syndrome. So the number one tool is training doctors to spot it and manage it instantly. But for a gene therapy, where the risk is a potential cancer years later, the most important tool is that mandatory 15-year study. The safety plan is custom-built for the therapy.
So after walking through this whole comprehensive safety blueprint, what's the big takeaway? What does all this mean for the future of medicine?
It really shows a fundamental shift in thinking. For these advanced therapies, safety isn't just something you check at the end. It's woven into the very fabric of the therapy, from the earliest design stages all the way through decades of use. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
And that's the whole point. This incredibly detailed and forward-thinking planning is what allows us to confidently step into this new era of medicine. It's how we strike that critical balance between unlocking the unbelievable potential of these therapies and making sure patients are protected. Period.
And that leaves us with one final big question. We are creating medicines that can literally edit our own biology. The challenge for all of us is to make sure our safety systems are just as innovative, just as powerful, and just as sophisticated as the incredible therapies they're designed to protect. Thanks for listening.